Hi there, this is Dr. Buckley. Thank you so much for joining me today. So in this particular video, I am going to do the traditional syllabus overview that typically takes place on the first day of class. Okay, so I think a natural starting point, because there are a lot of you that are probably unfamiliar with the interdisciplinary field of disability studies, is talking about what that field is. So what is disability studies? Well, I'm not going to read the syllabus to you for the most part in this video because I realize you guys can do that for yourself. But I did take a quote from the course description because I think it's very helpful. So let's read it together. So disability studies begins with the claim that the problem of disability is not the individual pathologies localized within persons with disabilities, but the way that normalcy is constructed to create the problem of the disabled person. Okay, so let's go ahead and unpack that quote together. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the way that you guys are probably most familiar with as far as talking about disability. So in traditional psychology courses, for example, like Psych 101 or Psych 265, if you've taken that, traditional psychology courses and the field of psychology in general tends to focus a lot on pathology, right? So it kind of conceptualizes disability as being as resulting from a particular injury to the brain or to other sort of environmental things. So for example, psychological injury as a result of trauma or as a result of abuse or something like that. Or brain injury as a result of maybe a traumatic, maybe as a result of blunt force trauma or as a result of sort of chemical imbalances or what have you. So really what we tend to focus on in the field of psychology is we emphasize pathologies, and specifically we emphasize the disease model, right? So we assume that the problem of disability or the barriers that are created for the disabled person is because of the particular disease that they have, right? So disability is disabling because of disease. So as psychologists, we tend to emphasize, for example, individual symptoms and diagnoses that are reflective of those symptoms. So we do various diagnostic inventories to try to explain the disorder that would result in those symptoms. And we also focus a lot on treatment, whether that treatment is a particular medication or a particular therapeutic intervention, right? And in fact, the manual that most clinical psychologists use is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which kind of goes into a lot of detail, right? Talking about various psychological disorders and what symptoms, right? And the duration of those symptoms, or how long those symptoms would have to persist in order for someone to meet the diagnostic criteria for a particular disorder, right? So again, the focus tends to be on deficiencies, right? So an individual is lacking perhaps a certain neurotransmitter or is lacking the normal functioning that we would see in a particular region of the brain, or a person is lacking perception, right? So in the case of like schizophrenia or psychotic disorders, a person is lacking perhaps normal affect, or is lacking accurate perception of reality, and so forth, right? So that's really the focus, certainly that I was trained with as a psychologist. Even as not a clinical psychologist, I'm very familiar with the DSM and all of that. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? So it's very, very useful in both psychological science and medical science to be able to proceed from a very systematic and scientific framework in that regard. And certainly that allows us to come up with effective interventions for both psychological disorders and other kinds of disease, right? But disability studies operates from a different level of analysis, right? So traditional psychology, or the field of psychology, predominantly operates from what's called the medical model or disease model. Whereas disability studies, the focus is very different. So instead of focusing on individual symptoms and talking about disability in terms of deficiencies, right? So instead of saying that a paralyzed person is deficient in sensation, right? Or that a deaf person is deficient in audio perception, or a depressed person is deficient in serotonin. Instead, disability studies focuses on what they perceive to be the most significant barrier confronting individuals with physical disabilities as well as psychological disorders, which is society's response to those disorders, or society's treatment of disabled people, right? So the real barrier of disability, according to the disability studies perspective, is not the individual diagnoses, right, or the individual pathologies, but rather how individuals with those disorders are marginalized by society, essentially. So we can talk about the individuals with disabilities or disabled people belonging to a marginalized group. All right, so just like we talk about gender studies and race and ethnicity and sexual orientation, and talk about how those groups have experienced discrimination and marginalization in our society throughout history, we can say the same for individuals with disabilities. So instead of focusing on symptoms and talking about disability in terms of deficiencies, we talk about disability in terms of society's poor treatment of individuals with disabilities and how that creates the true challenge of disability and how that needs to change. Because most people with disabilities are actually quite comfortable with their bodies. So certainly, depending upon the particular disability that you have, you might experience either emotional or physical pain, and no one's denying that. But most people with disabilities become acquainted with sort of who they are living in their bodies, right? But the most difficult challenge imposed by the experience of disability is how others react to it, right? So some of the things that we're going to talk about are widespread or systematic discrimination that individuals with disabilities have experienced. We're going to talk about problematic representation of disability in literature, in film, on television, and in the media. Okay? And we're also going to talk about the phenomenon of ableism. So ableism is basically having lower expectations for people with disabilities and basically problematic associations with disability. Okay? And really the ultimate objective of disability studies and what it intends to do as a formal academic discipline is it intends to create an empowering discourse around disability. It also promotes activism to end discrimination and ableism. And on kind of an abstract level, it attempts to help individuals with disabilities claim their identity as a disabled person, right? So instead of focusing on and being bound to the predominantly negative associations that society has created with disability or surrounding disability, disability studies aims to facilitate a more positive relationship for individuals with disabilities in terms of their relationship with themselves and with their disabled bodies. Okay? So that's basically the main themes that we're going to explore in this course. Okay, so now on to the things that I'm sure you guys are most interested in as students, which are kind of the course policies, right, and requirements. So I'm sure, as I said in my last video, hopefully you guys got the email alert that I sent out. So because of my status as a disabled person, as someone with several kind of acute respiratory conditions and other things happening, it is very unsafe for me to kind of be out in the community right now while the COVID pandemic is in full swing. So because of that, I was given accommodation to teach all of my courses this semester online. But if you're not, I have a lot of experience teaching in this domain. So I'm very excited about this transition, and hopefully you guys will have a great experience. But that said, this course is going to be entirely virtual. Our classroom has already been given to another professor, so we will not meet in the classroom at all. And I intend for this to be entirely asynchronous. So what that means, in effect, is that instead of having live Zoom sessions during our regularly scheduled course hours, you will be able to do everything for this course via Canvas, following whatever schedule works for you. So I have structured this course basically like a seminar, which means instead of me posting PowerPoints with lecture and things like that, mostly you guys are going to be exposed to course material by completing readings twice a week and posting your reaction to those readings on an online discussion board. So again, I will have some videos to accompany all those assignments and discussions. So you'll still get to see my face and you'll get a lot of supporting information. And I will certainly respond to your discussion posts and things like that, but we won't actually be meeting face to face. The only sort of caveat to that is that as far as due dates are concerned, a lot of the assignments you complete are going to be due at the end of whatever your class is. So if you're enrolled in section 1, a lot of your assignments are going to be due at the end of your class period, which is around 10:40, or at least it originally was. And if you're in section 2, a lot of your assignments are going to be due at 12:05. on Tuesdays and Thursdays because that's our typical, that's how the course was supposed to proceed. So if we were meeting face to face or doing live virtual meetings for our discussion, that's when they would be due. So I would prefer to follow that schedule. Okay. Regarding course materials, so there is, or there should be, a textbook that's available in the bookstore for this course. But because of COVID and the economic strain that it has caused, I decided to upload all of the materials for this course. So you do not need to buy any textbooks. If you are interested in the textbook and you can't find it in the bookstore, I'm happy to give you that information, but you are not required to purchase the textbook for this course. Okay, so again, in light of COVID, the pandemic, everything that we are faced with as a nation right now, I did really try to kind of pare down the amount of assignments that you are required to do. So basically, there are only 3 groups here. So you will have discussion posts every Tuesday and Thursday that you have readings assigned in this course. So if we watch a movie or do something else, you are not required to post a discussion for that day. And then you will have 6 very short papers that are due. The first 3 are due before the midterm, and the final 3 are due by the date that we're supposed to have the final exam. And then you'll have 2 exams. One is a midterm and one is a final exam. And those will both be open book, open note, that kind of thing. So hopefully not too arduous. Okay, so as far as the discussion posts, so again, this course is a seminar, which means our primary means of getting to know each other and also getting engaged with the course content is going to be through discussion, right? So discussion is going to be a really important component of this class. It accounts for 30% of your grade. So let's talk about how we're going to do discussion. Well, obviously, we're not meeting in the classroom. We're not meeting on Zoom live. Instead, we're going to be doing that on the discussion board on Canvas. And like I said, each day that readings are assigned, you'll have to submit discussion posts. So in total, there will be 2 prompts or two standard posts that you have to do, and then you'll have to respond to other students' posts, right? So I will assign a discussion prompt. That'll be your first discussion post. So for example, I might ask you something like, do you think assisted suicide should be legal? Why or why not? Right? So most of the questions will be something that you would want to discuss or something that would generate a lot of discussion. So that's your first discussion post is answering a question that I ask. Your second discussion post is going to be a question or talking point that you pose to the class, okay? So we'll talk more about the question or talking point, but again, the idea is the first discussion post comes from me, and the second discussion prompt comes from me, and the second one comes from you. And then the final discussion post, like I said, is you're going to respond to 2 classmates' discussion posts. Okay, so here is the rubric that I will use to evaluate your discussion posts. And I will also post on Canvas or upload to Canvas after the first couple discussions examples of excellent discussion posts so that you can kind of get a sense of what I require and evaluate your own responses. Okay? So we'll start with a 10. So each day you will get a discussion grade ranging from 0 to 10 for your contributions or your discussion posts. So if you make absolutely outstanding contributions to discussion via your posts, right? So if your posts are really, really relevant and thought-provoking, and in particular, if they make references from the assigned text, right? So if you include a lot of excerpts and direct quotes from the reading and use it to make your point, or even if you just reference, you don't necessarily have to reference the text verbatim, but just talk about a particular point that was raised in the reading, that's great. And particularly if you post something that a lot of other people respond to, right? So if several other people in the class were intrigued by your post and chose to respond to it, and you generate a lot of further discussion, that would be a 10 out of 10, right? So if you offer high quality discussion posts or responses to your peers, you will get a 10 out of 10. If you made reasonably good contributions to discussions, so they were relevant, they clearly referenced the assigned readings, and some people responded to it, so you generated some discussion, that would be a 9 out of 10, okay? If you do all of your required discussion posts, so you respond to my prompt, you give your own prompt, and you also respond to at least two of your colleagues, of other students' comments, and your posts are somewhat relevant, and they clearly reference the assigned readings, then you'll get an 8 out of 10. Okay, so even if nobody responds to your discussion prompt, as long as you reference the text and you complete the assignment and it's relevant, the points you raise are relevant, you'll get an 8 out of 10, which is a B. Okay. If you submit all of your required discussion posts, but they're mostly personal anecdotes or things that you've seen on television or things that you've learned in other classes, or certainly if you post about something from the reading or if you post about something that's not correct, right, that we've learned about, then that would mean you'll get closer to a 7 out of 10, right? So you always, always, always want to make sure that in your discussion posts, you are referencing the readings, right? Or referencing if we watch a film. Again, you won't have to do discussion posts on days we watch a film, but if you bring the film in, okay, and talk about that, and emphasize things that we've read about in the readings, that will get you at least an 8, right? But if you kind of stray from that, and I can't tell based on your discussion post that you've read the reading, then you're going to get closer to a 7. And certainly if you do not post all of the required discussion posts by the deadline, so by 10:40 if you're in section 1 or 12:05 if you're in section 2, you have to have all of the posts submitted by then. And in most cases, I will not accept late posts. So obviously, if you're ill, if you have an extenuating circumstance or accommodations, I will allow for late assignments, but in most cases, in the absence of that excuse, I will not accept them. And again, you have to have all of the required posts by the deadline or you will receive a 0. But I've never really had students get zeros on discussion, particularly when it's all online. And again, I'll post examples so you have a sense of what I'm looking for. Okay, so again, I've already said this. Things are going to be due Tuesdays and Thursdays. Your discussion posts are going to be due Tuesdays and Thursdays at either 10:40 or 12:05. Okay. Response papers. Okay. So what's going to happen every week or every week of class is for every reading, I will upload a Microsoft Word document. And on that Microsoft Word document, I will have at least 3 and sometimes 5 writing prompts for you to choose from for that particular reading. Okay? And you can choose only one of those prompts, okay, for a response paper. Okay? So you'll choose one of those prompts and write a 2 to 3 page paper answering the prompt. Okay? But critically, you do not have to do a response paper for all of the readings. Right? So there will be 3 response papers due, like I said, before the midterm, and 3 due before the final exam period. Okay? So you can choose whichever 3 readings you want to do, okay? But the response paper for an individual reading, okay, is going to be due 7 days after the reading was assigned, okay? So if you decide that you really want to do a response paper or write a response paper, for example, our first reading is going to be a week from Tuesday, right? So if you're really excited by our first reading and you decide that you definitely want to do a response paper for that reading, you will have to get it to me the following Thursday, okay? So you can do a response paper on whichever readings that you want, okay? But those prompts are going to essentially expire after 7 days, okay? So you have to write your response paper within 7 days of the assigned reading, okay? And you have to have at least 3 of them before the midterm and 3 before the final exam, okay? So what are my requirements as far as the papers themselves? Well, like I said, I'm looking for a brief paper, so it only has to be 2 to 3 pages double-spaced, and the criteria that I'm going to use to evaluate your paper is I'm looking for basic writing proficiency is number 1. Sorry, you can't see my hand. Number 1. So I'm looking for example, no grammatical errors. I'm looking for no typos. I'm looking for complete sentences that are clear. And I'm looking for things like appropriate word choice. Okay, things like that. Just basic writing proficiency. I'm also looking for depth of reflection and analysis. Okay, so basically what that means is I'm looking for examples of quotations from the text. So references that you make to specific excerpts or specific content from the reading. So I'm looking for evidence that you can support the arguments that you're making or the answer that you're providing with the text. So textual support. And And I'm also looking for a basic understanding of the content, right? So just like I need to know from your discussion post, it needs to be obvious that you have read the reading, right? The same thing holds for the response papers. So I need you to demonstrate to me that you have read and understood the readings, okay, well enough to be able to articulate a response that clearly references the text. Okay? And it's also great if you can, for both your discussion posts and your response papers, if you can draw connections. Okay? So if you can relate the current reading maybe to things that we've talked about in the past, that would be great. Okay? And again, I will post examples of excellent response papers on Canvas so that you can see kind of what I'm looking for more in more concrete terms. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are also going to be a non-cumulative final exam during the last week of the semester and a midterm exam, I believe the 7th or 8th week of the semester. So the way that these exams are going to work is you are going to receive 5 to 7 essay questions just in a Word document, and you will have 7 days at least to complete your answers. And they are also open note, open book. Okay? So basically what I'm looking for each of the questions is a short essay. So we're talking maybe 4 paragraphs in length, and I'm largely going to evaluate them according to the same criteria that I do for the response paper. Okay, so do you completely answer the question? Do you show basic writing proficiency? Do you clearly reference particular texts and films when you're responding to the question? Things like that. And I will post midterms that got an A, so that'll give you a sense maybe of what I'm looking for when we go into the final exam. Okay? So one thing I want to emphasize is I'm a pretty laid back professor. You might have already sort of gotten that impression. But I am a stickler when it comes to plagiarism. Okay? So anytime you write a discussion post or a response paper or an answer to a midterm, okay, I am going to use plagiarism detection software, okay, to make sure that your words are your own. So everything that you submit on Canvas will be filtered to potentially detect plagiarism. So obviously you want to make sure that all of your words are your own, but you can reference the text, and I encourage that. So you can include excerpts and quotes, things like that. And as long as the excerpt is in quotations and you reference the author and the page number, that would not be considered plagiarism. Okay? So as long as you properly cite your source, that is not considered plagiarism. So certainly if you have any questions about things that you've written in terms of plagiarism requirements, certainly let me know, and I would be happy to schedule a meeting with you and talk about it, but just be aware of that. Okay, so the last thing I want to emphasize in this video is that if you flip through the syllabus, I do have on the very last page this little cutout sheet here. And basically this is, I consider my syllabus a contract, right? So my syllabus is my agreement with you that all of my expectations for the course have been clearly laid out, and you're aware of my expectations, right? I've set clear expectations for you, and unless there are extreme extenuating circumstances, I will not divert from that underlying structure, right? So that's my pledge to you, is that whatever is in the syllabus will stay in the syllabus, and I will uphold that agreement with you. But you also, right, have to acknowledge that you have received this information and that you understand it, and that you will not deviate from what I require of you. Okay? So this is just kind of our formal agreement of that. So what I would like you to do is read the syllabus very, very carefully, and also take note of the information that is in the syllabus, right? So I have all the due dates there, and sort of important information like that. So go ahead and keep the syllabus in your back pocket, so that you can reference it. And when you feel confident that you have read the syllabus and that you understand it in its entirety, go ahead and sign the bottom of that syllabus sheet. You can certainly go in and type your name and your signature if you are using an electronic copy and you don't have an iPad with a stylus or whatever. So give some means of electronic signature if you have to. And then go ahead and snap a photo of it. So using your phone camera, just take a picture of the paper with your signature and upload it to Canvas. Okay? So there will be an assignment link that says Syllabus Signature, and you can just upload that image for me, and that will count as your signature. And I would like that by sometime the first week of classes, okay? So before next Tuesday, make sure you have uploaded it. All right? So I'm going to have some other videos coming out for the first week. So I'm going to give you a screen share video where I talk about the structure of Canvas and where to find everything. And I'm also going to do a video giving you examples of good talking questions and talking points, and good discussion posts. So look for that. And I will also have information for our first discussion, which is going to take place on Thursday. All right, so this video is long enough, and I will see you in my next one.